Simon has mentioned, this guest that we have waiting in Melbourne for you as to whether the effective gag order that applies on M&A deals really makes a whole lot of sense. The Takeovers Panel, this is the current requirement, that buyers and sellers sign a non-disclosure agreement and stay out of the media spotlight. Jeremy Liebler of top law firm Arnold Bloch Lieber saying, though, that law's out of touch and it's not particularly effective either. He's in our Melbourne studio for you today. Jeremy, welcome into the programme. Just set the scene, if you can, briefly for this in terms of what really is rubbing you up the wrong way. What does it come down to?
Well, we have to look at it in context. And in takeovers, when there's a matter before the Takeovers Panel, parties are asked to sign non-disclosure agreements and not talk to the media at all. And there is a reason for that, and that reason isn't a bad reason. But the question is, the world that we live in today has changed. Media has changed. We have a 24-hour news cycle. We have social media. Everyone has access to information almost instantaneously. And, you know, there's just a question as to whether or not it's practical. And you have that situation combined with the fact that media is increasingly becoming a tool of both bidders and targets in any M&A transaction. So you were just talking about Asiano. Yeah. And, you know, that's a great example. Look at the power of that the media has at this point in that transaction. It's been leaked. We don't know if it's been leaked by the bidder intentionally. My sense is that it hasn't. The only reason the bidder would leak it intentionally is if they want to apply pressure on the target board. But irrespective of that, the reality is that who controls the story now? It's the press. So particularly retail shareholders, the only information that they have at their disposal is the information they read in the newspapers and television.
Hasn't it always been that way, though, for retail? Retail shareholders have always been at the bottom of the food chain.
That's right, and they remain so.
Yeah.
But
so what's new?
Well, what's new is that you have the social media aspect of it, but more importantly, you have this advent of shareholder activism. And activists have taken the use of media in M&A to an entirely new level. And look at another sort of current example. You've got Sandon and you have BlueScope. And at the moment, Sandon has released a report publicly that they want BlueScope to take certain action, and there has been widespread media coverage. In fact, the media coverage was so extreme that the company had to issue a statement saying that they have no intentions to close the still.
All right, Jeremy, just because of timing, we're going to have to now make this a rapid-fire next kind of little block. Simon's coming in, and let's move it on. Go, Simon. Sure.
Jeremy, this is music to Carson and my ears as journalists, obviously, but how can this actually be improved? What are the, you know, can one get traction around this, you know, greater sort of media responsibility, I suppose you're calling it?
I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a reality, and all parties have to embrace it and accept it. It's particularly an issue for target boards. It's not necessarily a bad thing for retail shareholders. At the end of the day, retail shareholders will just have more equal access to information. Target boards, on the other hand, face a serious problem because activists will go after them. They'll go after them personally, and that's going to put pressure on directors of target boards to focus on short-term performance rather than long-term strategic outcomes.
So what are you calling for, both within the Takeovers Panel and maybe legal changes?
I think that the Takeovers Panel has to reassess its position on a ban on media canvassing during Takeover Panel applications. It's not black and white, and there are good reasons, and there will always be circumstances where, in order to preserve the integrity of the process, the panel will need to impose certain restrictions. But at the moment, I don't think it's appropriate in all circumstances, and I think the panel needs to take a look at it, and I think it may well be doing that.
But you'd acknowledge, you know, in terms of the ban and then enforcing and actually working out who triggered what cause of action, not exactly a great landscape of precedent there to look to find that, you know, the regulator's actually ahead of the game on this. Seems to be like fighting fires and not really putting much out in the process.
Well, look, I'm not sure that that's entirely fair. The Takeovers Panel is an incredibly efficient body. You know, when you compare the situation in M&A transactions now compared to before the panel's invent,
yes, well, that's fair
you'd
enough.
be caught up in court for 6 months to a year in the middle of an M&A transaction.
Yeah, it wasn't so much critical or finding fault with the speed of execution so much as the inability, as you've said at the outset, for these things to remain mum. Far from it.
Well, I think that's a reflection of the market and how the market's evolving. And, you know, at the moment, we haven't seen anything yet. Once the US hedge funds come across and realise, and they're starting to realise, that the legal landscape in Australia is far more suited to activists than in the United States, we are going to see a massive influx of very aggressive US taking on top 100 ASX listed companies.
Well, on that note, because of that, we are going to have to call time, but that's a good note to pause, reflect, and thank you, Jeremy, and come back as that groundswell of foreign interest only grows. Jeremy Liebler of top law firm, the Arnold Block Liebler, in our Melbourne studio. Simon, thank you as always. Another busy week. We'll see you in 7 days.
Thanks, Carl.
And look forward to your company then.